Hi John, hey Jaguars. We are in Soof by Sarah Weeks. That companion story to So Be It. There's that big jar of jelly beans. This is chapter 5. This will be the last chapter for this week. More than a spark like loves to fly. My parents' 30th anniversary was May 18th. Dad had been up in the attic for weeks working on a surprise for my mother. He was refinishing an antique steamer trunk that had belonged to her great-grandmother, Alpha. First, he'd taken off the tarnished brass hardware and soaked everything in vinegar. Then he'd spent hours carefully sanding the dark oak panels, rubbing them with old t-shirts soaked in linseed oil to bring out the grain. He'd worked on the chest every chance he got, mostly on weekends, and it was my job to be his lookout. If I saw my mother coming up the driveway from town or heading into the house after hanging up the wash, I would signal him by knocking on the ceiling in my room with the end of a wooden broom handle. A constellation of little black marks dotted the plaster above my bed from all that tapping. Saturday morning, my mother spent several hours working on Heidi's baby quilt in the living room and listening to WJFF on the radio. I would check on her every 15 minutes or so, then report back to my father, who was keeping busy out in the garage getting the recycling ready for a dump run until the coast was clear and he could go upstairs to his workshop. After lunch, my mother finally put her sewing away and went off to the Stop and Shop to buy fixings for a special dinner she had planned. As soon as she was gone, I ran and got my father. "Well, come take a look and tell me what you think," he said. Duck followed me up the narrow stairs to the attic, where he made a beeline for the mouse hole he'd discovered the last time we'd been up there together. "Think she'll like it?" my father asked as he picked up a dirty rag and tossed it onto the pile in the corner. "I bet she cries when she sees it," I said. The chest was beautiful. The brass hinges glistened like golden fish in the pool of warm sunlight that poured in through the skylights. Even with the windows open, it was hot up here. I tapped my right elbow 3 times, then my left, so they'd be even. "You okay?" my father asked, glancing over at me. I knew why he was asking. I tended to tap more when I was anxious. "I'm fine," I told him, even though it wasn't true. "You're not feeling nervous about Heidi's visit, are you?" he asked, wiping the sweat off his face with his sleeve. My father knew me too well. All my mother had been able to talk about lately was Heidi's visit. She'd even planned the meals she was going to serve, right down to the dessert. I knew all the Heidi stories backward and forward, but I didn't know her. I was worried she wouldn't like me, or that my parents would decide they liked her better than me. "Why should I be nervous?" I asked, resisting the urge to tap again and biting the inside of my cheek 3 times instead. "She's a nice person, right?" "Very nice," my father said. "You'll be sharing your room with her. Are you going to be okay with that?" "Does she snore?" I asked. My father laughed. "I guess we'll find out soon enough, won't we?" He took the cap off the bottle of linseed oil and poured some on a clean rag. "Dad," I said, unable to hold it inside any longer, "does Heidi know that I'm weird?" He stopped what he was doing and looked at me, his face all sad and soft. "I wish you wouldn't say that, baby girl," he told me. "You're not weird. You're wonderful. And Heidi is very excited to meet you." "How do you know?" "She said so in her letter. Ask your mom if you don't believe me." "Well, what if Heidi doesn't like me?" I asked. "What's not to like?" he said, screwing the cap back onto the bottle of oil and setting it aside. "Now scoot and let me finish up before your mom gets home, okay?" Right before dinner, my father brought the chest downstairs and presented it to my mother. Just as I'd predicted, she burst into tears the minute she saw it. "Oh, Roy, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Told you she was going to cry," I said. "I'm afraid my gift pales in comparison to yours," my mother said, wiping away her happy tears. "I made you a pie." Lemon chess? My father asked hopefully. My mother nodded and he let out a happy whoop. You know how I feel about your pie, Rube. She made real whipped cream to go with it too, I told him, not the fake stuff from a can. I guess mine wasn't the only secret you've been keeping, huh, baby girl? Well, it was my idea to put a fan in the window so you wouldn't smell the pie baking, I admitted. Come to think of it, how on earth did you manage to do all that work on Great Granny's chest upstairs without me even noticing, Roy? My mother asked. Rory was my lookout, my father said proudly, throwing his arm around my shoulders. She's a regular James Bond. James who? I asked. Bond, James Bond. He's a famous spy, my father explained. Like Inspector Gadget? I said. My mother laughed. Yes, only James Bond is very handsome. Hey, said my father, what about me? Oh, you're far more handsome than James Bond, and our daughter is an excellent double agent, my mother said. I didn't suspect a thing. The chest isn't quite finished, my father explained. The wood is old and thirsty. It's going to need a couple more coats of oil. I'll get on that right after dinner. I ran my fingers over the smooth top. I sure wish I had something like this in my room. I could, A, keep my summer clothes in it in the winter, and B, keep my winter clothes in it in the summer. That way I wouldn't ever run out of hangers. Oh, no, you don't, my mother teased. You may have your father wrapped around your little finger, but this chest belongs to me, even if I have to spend the next 30 years baking pies to pay him back for it. My father grinned and pulled her close. Happy anniversary, Rube, he said, and leaned in to give her a kiss. Duck barked and wagged his tail the way he always did whenever anyone hugged or kissed each other in our house. It made me happy, too. We had steak and twice-baked potatoes for dinner. There was garlic bread with parsley butter, green beans, and, of course, the lemon chess pie for dessert. There were even candles and fresh flowers on the table. After the dishes were done, my father opened a bottle of champagne and some sparkling cider for me. We clinked glasses and made toasts to everyone we could think of, including the mailman, even though he wasn't particularly fond of duck. Well, what about Heidi's baby? I said. Shouldn't we toast to her? Absolutely, said my father. Do we know what they're planning to name her yet? It had been Heidi's idea to call me Aurora, on account of something Bernadette had once said about the importance of having a promising name. I haven't heard anything about a name yet, said my mother, but if I have to guess, I expect she'll be called Sophia, after Heidi's mama. Well, maybe she'll be lucky like Heidi was, I said. That would be nice, my mother agreed. My father raised his glass. To baby Sophia, he said. And to luck, my mother added. And to duck, I said, because it rhymes. We clinked glasses, and after a few more toasts, my parents were both a little tipsy, and I was ready for bed. After putting on my nightgown and brushing my teeth, I turned off the light, stared out the window at the moon for a while. I wondered why stars looked round up close and pointy from far away. I wondered how the same sky could look blue during the day and black at night. I wondered if Heidi was nervous about meeting me too, and whether she would remember what color the jelly beans were that she'd eaten before she gave the jar to my mother. Eventually all that wondering made me sleepy, and I pulled the covers up to my chin and closed my eyes. In the middle of the night, Duck started barking. Sometimes he did that when raccoons raided the bird feeders or a skunk wandered into the yard to rummage around the compost heap. This was different. He sounded scared. "Rory!" my father shouted, bursting into my room. "Come quick! The house is on fire!" I jumped out of bed and ran into the hall. Dark smoke was billowing down the attic stairs. Duck was frantic, running back and forth, barking his head off. "Cover your mouth and nose with this," my mother said, handing me a damp washcloth. The light bulb in the fixture above our heads flickered and buzzed, then suddenly burst with a loud pop. I screamed, and my father scooped me up in his arms like a fish in a net. I clung to him as he carried me through the house, while my mother, in a robe and slippers, hurried along behind us, clutching her purse and her jewelry box. Down the hill, the firehouse siren had already begun to blare, and soon the trucks arrived, carrying their bleary-eyed crews of volunteers. I felt like I was 1,000,000 miles away, watching the scene from outer space. This couldn't really be happening. Not to us. The air was thick with smoke, and it looked as if a fire-breathing dragon had crawled into the attic and was shooting bright orange flames through the roof. Our roof. One by one, the windows began to break. "Everybody get out okay, Sheriff?" asked one of the firemen. It was Dave Toffel, Lindsay's father. I noticed he was still wearing pajamas under his rubber coat. "Yes," my father told him, "we're all here." But when I looked around, I realized he was wrong. "Where's Duck?" I asked. And that's the end of chapter 5. That was definitely an element of surprise. I was not expecting that when I read this book the first time. But we'll look at chapter 6 next week. Bye for now.